had been at one place, this base called Dwyer, and then he wanted to see some more fighting, and so they took him to another place. I think that place was called Delhi. And that's where he was when we left off. He had just been frustrated by the fact that he had tried to lead a mission, and he had tried to give his opinion about how it should be done, and the Americans didn't listen. Rightly so, since it was the Americans leading the mission and he was just backup, but whatever. And he felt like he should have been listened to. They didn't listen to him. So he was upset about that. It didn't go as well as he imagined that it could have gone. It ruined the building when they dropped a 500-pound bomb on it twice. And it didn't obliterate everything like it would have had they followed his careful tutelage. And that's where we left off. He is still there, still in Afghanistan. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm just going to skim a lot of this because it's boring. It's boring. He doesn't say anything that's interesting. He tells us, I mean, he does say some things that are sort of interesting, but it just feels like so much falsehood on so much falsehood. I just can't give it the time of day. But one thing that is interesting is how much he talks about how the press was following him constantly while he was in Afghanistan, and they had been given permission to work with him, but they had to promise that they would not release any of the footage. They had to just sit on it until he was out of there. And they were complying, but he just acts like, it's like, how dangerous could things have been if they let the press corps travel with you? So he wants to be all, you know, playing soldier and, you know, got that 50 caliber weapon. And then he's just over there, you know, shooting the gun. Then it's also dangerous. And he's just alone in the world, you know, just one of the guys just trying to defend freedom. Meanwhile, he's babysitting the press. I don't, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Blah, blah, blah. I can't even get into it. Remember last time we said that he likes all his little words? Yeah, he calls the interpreter the terp. That is so annoying. So then I talk to the terp. You know, that's short for interpreter. If you don't know. You might not know, because you're not a soldier like me, who has to work with the terp on the reg. Okay, so, then he talks about how one day he's babysitting the press and they keep bugging him because they want to get out of the vehicle. They want to look around. They want to take some pictures. He's being like, no, guys, no. Okay, just stay in the car. It's not safe out there yet. And they just would not let up. So he's like, fine, guys, you can get out for a little bit, but be careful about the landmines. There's a lot of them around here. So they get out. It's like, okay, if they're not supposed to get out, if it's your job, if you're just like, you know, your job to keep them safe, then don't let them out. Like, doesn't matter what they say. Just be like, no, sorry, we don't get out. There's a window. Take a picture. Get a backbone. He just finished telling us about the story where no one would listen to him and he gave in and look how things went. Okay, well, here's another instance where you can use that newfound backbone that you claim that you now had. Don't let the journalists out of the car if it's so dangerous. Just say no. He doesn't know what no means. So they get out and immediately they begin to be fired upon. Bullets are whizzing past their head. Explosions are going off. And he says, I looked around. Everyone was on their stomachs except me and two others. So, I mean, I guess that's an easy test to find out who's got some brains in the bunch. Gideon made people go lay down by a creek and see who drank laying on their stomachs and who cupped the water. Well, we have a new way of testing who should be around and who shouldn't be a soldier. And it's called fire a gun over someone's head and see if they hit the ground or not. Okay. He tells a lot of sad stories that I don't want to get into. They're just depressing. And then he talks about the time when he found out through listening over the radio that people were coming after him. They were coming after him. And they called him Red Fox. Red Fox. So he's listening about this person. They keep calling this person Red Fox. Is Red Fox in trouble? Had Red Fox done anything? Who's Red Fox? He asks himself. Suddenly, in a blinding flash of inspiration, he realizes that he is the Red Fox and that he's about to be murdered. And he's just sitting there drinking hot chocolate, blinking at the radio. What? And they say that he better get out of there. And so he sits there and curses to himself for a while. That's what you do when someone wants to come and kill you. That'll stop the murderer. And he says, my mind flashed back to Eton. The fox I'd glimpsed when stoned from the window of the loo. So he really had been a messenger from the future. After all. One day you'll be alone late at night in the darkness, hunted like me. See how you like it. Did the fox need to show up to ask you how you'd feel about being hunted in the darkness? Interesting. Then he says that in the subterfuge of night, he was pulled from the ranks by none other than Colonel Ed, the man who'd gotten him into it in the first place. And as it had happened, an Australian magazine had picked up the fact that he was in Afghanistan, but the magazine was of no consequence, so nobody paid any attention. Then some dimwit American decided to flash it all over their website. Now everybody knew about it. Dumb Yanks. And so he says that when Colonel Ed comes to him and says, we've got to pull you, he's like, I was on the verge of begging to stay, but I could see there was no chance. On the verge of begging to stay, please. I bet he couldn't wait to pack his bags. So then he jumps on that Chinook that's still turning and burning. Another one of his dumb phrases. While he's on the flight back, he happens to be in the plane, and I guess they let him ride like an animal with the rest of them in the C-17. A lot of people who were on the flight were wounded and going back home. Now, there's a lot of jubilation about finally getting out of that hellscape. And he makes his way to some of the more grievously wounded soldiers who were like really, they were like on stretchers, horribly, horribly wounded. And he says in this wonderful line, the best line of the book so far, he says, I felt angry with myself for having been so self-absorbed. Oh, Harry, could you be becoming a man? Is this it? Is this your blooding? When you finally saw that somebody else was hurting and you decided to care about them more than yourself? But the beauty of the moment is short-lived. Because following that, he says, I spent the rest of that flight thinking about the many young men and women going home in similar shape and all the ones not going home at all. And I thought about the people at home who didn't know the first thing about this war. By choice. Many opposed it, but few knew a damn thing about it. I wondered why. Whose job was it to tell them? Oh yeah, I thought. The press. So, right back to this simmering pot of self-absorption. The press ruins everything, and even this, they're wrecking it for everybody else. Everybody should know what's going on at the war, but we don't because the press doesn't know what they're doing. Now, I will join him in the sentiment that the press doesn't really know what they're doing, but then do something about it. If you think that the press is so awful, why don't you use your resources to start some sort of alternative media? There's an idea. But no, it's just so much easier to complain and cry. Why do something about it when you can just weep tears into your pillow night after night? Then he comes home, and of course we have the obligatory passage about his difficult entry back into civilian life. Look, here's the thing. I would not be this glib about a soldier who had really experienced some hardship. And I'm not saying Harry didn't see some things. He does tell a pretty sad story about a little boy who was wheeled up to him in a wheelbarrow who was missing his legs. We sort of skimmed that. But I'm not saying he didn't see some things. I'm sure that he did. And I'm sure his entry into it was difficult. But so much of what he experienced in Afghanistan is to be questioned that you just wonder how wounded he truly was. There's all the time people trying to hold him back. In fact, I take that back. He didn't actually see the boy in the wheelbarrow without the legs. Somebody blocked his view so he couldn't see it. Now, he knew it had happened, but somebody was like, you don't want to see this. You'll never be able to get it out of your head. So I just don't know how much he really experienced. Anyway, once he finally gets home, he sees Pa, he sees William. They give him what amounts to the most affection he's ever had in his life, a squeeze on the shoulder.